Lana Del Rey. Lana Del Rey. Now that name alone is so aesthetically pleasing. One thing that I find very interesting about Lana is that she has a very strong personal branding and aesthetic surrounding her. And you can't say that about a lot of other artists. Like, Lana's personal branding is so strong that you can use her name as an adjective. You can't do that with a lot of people. Like, take Halsey for instance. I love them, so I'm going to use them as an example. If I said, "That's so Halsey," you more than likely won't know what I'm talking about. If something did come to your mind when I said that, you would be probably thinking of like 2015 Tumblr, maybe this very specific shade of blue, the P4 or P5 Visco filter that plagued the internet. But if I said, "That's so Lana Del Rey," or "That's so Lana Del Rey vinyl," you would probably know what I'm talking about. And because she is so aesthetic based, I thought it would be really fun to do a deep dive on all the albums and discuss the aesthetics surrounding them. In fact, you might recognize me from TikTok because I already did a video on the Born to Die album. But if you don't recognize me, hi, I'm Alexis. I'm in fashion related content, vlogs, and other deep dive videos like this. Let's start off with Born to Die. To summarize the Born to Die album, there are a lot of 60s elements, such as the style of her hair in the promotional photo shoots, which was a very popular hairstyle in the 60s. The heart-shaped sunglasses that she wore, which again, were very popular during that time period. And not only did she wear the sunglasses, but she also mentioned them in her song Diet Mountain Dew. Now, another portion of her album and the stories that they tell involve a little thing called the Americana aesthetic. And to be blunt, it is a very romanticized version of different elements of America. And in this aesthetic, specifically like the Born to Die era, you see a lot of American flags, Coca-Cola bottles. Why did I say? I like growled when I said that. The signature bright red lipstick, which were all things very popular in the 60s and core elements of the Americana aesthetic. And I do want to put a disclaimer here and state that these aesthetics are very surface level and obviously very romanticized, because for a lot of people in the 60s, specifically minorities, it wasn't just a cute little life that you could reblog on Tumblr. They had to deal with a lot of struggles. So that's just something realistic to keep in mind when discussing the Americana aesthetic. Because like I said, it is a very one-sided, romanticized version. And kind of tying in with that, let's discuss the Born to Die Paradise album. Now, we still see the Americana aesthetic in the Born to Die album, just in a different way. Such as in songs like Ride, which heavily lean into being on the open road, not belonging to any one place or person, and just an overall sense of being free. And as someone born and raised in California, the desert can be a very magical place, given that is like the romanticized version of it, because if you don't have money, it's really hard to live out there. And even though Ride is more desert oriented, and I did spend a lot of time talking about just that one song, the Paradise album of itself has a much different aesthetic. With Paradise, you have palm trees, white bathing suits, pools, and bright blue water. It's more of a tropical, luxurious feeling that values like partying, wealth, and love. And what do those things sound like to you? If you said Las Vegas, you are correct. And with that being said, it is specifically the Las Vegas party scene, which, relating it back to Ride, if you've ever been to Las Vegas, you would know that you have to drive through the literal middle of nowhere to get to the city. So to paint a picture of the Paradise album aesthetic, it focuses on the freedom of the open road and then features some of the more luxurious elements that can accompany the party scene there. Now for fan favorite Ultraviolence, which I am giving today in this outfit. At least I hope so. This album came out in 2014 during the 2014 Tumblr era, and thank God I did not listen to this album during that time. Like, I already have a lot of problems, so I can't imagine listening to this very depressive and moody album at a very impressionable age. Personally, Ultraviolence is one of my favorite albums because the aesthetic centers around California and like an underground music scene, and it's a little bit more alternative. Not necessarily in the sense of her music or her singing, but in the aesthetic surrounding the album. Now, when you take a look at the music videos, the lyrics in the songs, and the men showcased in them, you can see that it's more of like an underground or alternative music scene. And I think there's something so beautiful about Lana's singing voice and an edgier aesthetic. Now, I would say that this album is very depressing, or at least has a darker, moodier aesthetic, because a lot of fans would argue that Honeymoon is a lot more sad. So things that you can kind of associate with the Ultraviolence album aesthetic to kind of paint a picture would be a more darker color palette. I'm thinking like blacks, grays, dark blues. Other things that kind of relate to the Ultraviolence aesthetic would be leather jackets, bars, drinking, and my favorite, musicians. And the next album I'm going to be discussing is Honeymoon, which is a very stark contrast to Ultraviolence. Even though it's more sad and depressing lyrically, it has more of a summertime feeling, again, just aesthetic-wise, and not necessarily lyrically. There's sort of like a complementary opposite between the aesthetic and what she's singing about. Because when you think of summer, you think of like sunshine, the warmth on your skin, a light feeling, flower scents flowing through the breeze. And let me tell you, the lyrics do not remind you of that at all. Because despite the dreamier aesthetic of the music videos and the bright colors of the album, there's an overwhelming sense of melancholy. And if you've ever been depressed, which if you listen to Lana or follow me, I'm assuming you have been, you would probably understand that feeling melancholy during the summer is such an out-of-body experience. And it kind of feels like you're disassociated watching a version of yourself. And this album gives you that same feeling. And when you take a look at the Honeymoon aesthetic, it is very summer oriented. It has been speculated that the album takes place in Italy because you see lots of gardens, the beach, and then there's like lots of flowers and fruit. And in the music videos, you do see like a lot of people dancing in water with very flowy white like clothing. And it does kind of remind me of like Renaissance paintings. Now for Lust for Life. This album is obviously very 60s. It's very free-spirited, not just with the clothes Lana is wearing or the flowers in her hair, but in the Lust for Life music video, there is like this choreographed old-timey singing in front of the vintage microphones. And that is how singers would sing and like entertain the audience in like the 50s and 60s. And I think Lana does this so well. Now, some things that can be associated with the Lust for Life aesthetic would of course be flower crowns. Not necessarily in the same way that the Born to Die flower crowns were. That was a little bit more hipster. And overall, this album does feel like summer to me. The sound of the songs in like White Mustang and Cherry just sounds so relaxing and so freeing. I personally can't help but relate it to the summer, and I view the color palettes for this album with very warm burnt oranges, yellows, even though that can't be seen in like the album art, although I do really like the burnt red color in the font. Now for Norman Rockwell. Now this album is set in the 80s in California, and for some reason this just seems so nostalgic to me. I was born in 98. Yes, if you did the math, I am 24, even though I don't look like it right now. And although I was born in like 98, a lot of things from the 80s were carried over into like the 90s, and I just can't explain it, but like being from California and then watching the Norman Rockwell music videos is just so nostalgic to me. The fact that the music videos looked like they were filmed on VHS, the tacky infomercials with like the bright colors popping up, the outfits, even like the shades of blue in these videos kind of just like perfectly picture what the blues showed up like in like Polaroid photos, film photos, or on like a camcorder. This whole album just seems very familiar to me in a way. And although the 80s color palette isn't very traditional, because most people, when you think of like the 80s color palette, you probably think of like the bright purples, the bright like neon greens, that swirly fun movie theater carpet, or even like the old Taco Bell interior. And you don't see that color palette in the Norman Rockwell album, but you do still see a different kind of 80s color palette. And you can see like this highlighter color in Lana's jacket. And overall, I just feel like they chose more of like this sort of color palette than the traditional 80s one. And I feel like that fits the California aesthetic a lot more, because when you think of California, think of like different shades of blue for the sky and like the ocean, yellow for the sun, and I would say green in the sense of like palm trees, but realistically all of our plants are like dead most of the year. And this album is very beach oriented, so things that you can kind of associate with the Norman Rockwell aesthetic would be like 80s styled outfits that you would wear on a boat or like on the boardwalk. I personally think of like those giant vintage boom boxes, or like roller skating with like a cassette tape. Now for Chemtrails Over the Country Club, it's once again a very stark contrast from the last album I mentioned. And the album aesthetic itself is very much giving Blair Waldorf. Personally, I think of the rich country club life with a very sinister aspect. It honestly reminds me a lot of WandaVision, where she would be traveling through time and everything would seem like really perfect, but there are just these sinister elements. And things I associate with this album would be pearl necklaces, convertible cars, white dresses of course, and just a very polished, rich lifestyle. However, there is a polar opposite side to this album that honestly I would have not picked up on just listening to the music if I didn't watch the Chemtrails Over the Country Club music video. And all I can say is that if I was in the desert and I saw that on the side of the road, I would break every speed limit trying to get the hell out of there. And despite that, the overall album aesthetic is still very polished. Like a very polished front that when you peel it back, there's just so many dark, twisted elements to it. Now in terms of color palette, despite the album cover just being in black and white, I feel like for the music videos it is more of a desert color palette. Like for instance in White Dress, mostly a neutral color palette or like earthy tones. So like lots of burnt yellows, browns, some rust colors. So personally, again, even though that like the album cover is black and white, I do associate it with more of like a neutral tone color palette, desert colors, and then of course, you know, still like with white, because like White Dresses is like the entire album aesthetic. Now for Blue Banisters. Blue Banisters has a very homey feel. To me, the album feels like I was invited over to someone's house to watch their home videos. Or like I was invited over to someone's family Thanksgiving with their very loving family, and I walked in and I was like, damn, y'all live like this? Again, it's debated that this album is set in the 90s, but with the way Lana dresses, there are always going to be like 50s, 60s elements, at least to me. Now for the sound of the album, it makes me feel like I'm sitting in someone's foyer, the entertainment room. I don't know how to pronounce that word, I'm not rich. But I feel like I'm sitting in my friend's living room, which is Lana in this instance, and she's sitting playing her grand piano, singing about her life story. And to me, the color palette is very spring-like, and the feel of the album is also very light. And in terms of like album aesthetic, it is very suburban, and it leans more into like a traditional suburban lifestyle with like, you know, a white picket fence, a family dog, a loving family. Now for Lana's most recent album, did you know there's a tunnel under Ocean Boulevard? Now let me tell you, Fall Out Boy would be very proud of that album title. And because Ocean Boulevard is so new and there wasn't a lot of promotional photos to go along with it, at least ones that I saw, I don't really have a very specific aesthetic when it comes to mind. So this one, well, all of these are open to conversation, but I feel like this one is a little bit just more interpretive. So I'll just be going over like my speculations of the album aesthetic, and it's giving old Hollywood and like film noir. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I was originally a film major. Now to me, Ocean Boulevard is kind of like if Lana was watching back the movies of her life, but again in a very vintage old Hollywood sense, not necessarily a home video sense. Like she's watching it through film, like it's a film production. So much like Blue Banisters, there is a personal feel to it. And you're getting a closer look into like Lana's life memories and her story, which is why I kind of associate this album with Lana kind of watching her life from a third person perspective, just in the style of film and like old Hollywood glamour. But definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and if you think I should do other deep dive videos on my channel. And with that, I'll see you guys in another video. Bye!